Hello everyone, welcome back to another Lit Happens episode. Today is episode 10. We're going to talk about artists of the floating world today. I have my co-host Adriel who's going to be leading the charge in that. How are you, Adriel?
Yeah, good, thanks, Bill. Or should it be konnichiwa? We're looking at artists of the floating world.
Yeah.
No,
Love
doing
that.
well, doing well.
I love that. And pro tip, if you don't know anything about Japanese, you can just do what I do and get your school's Japanese teacher to come in and do a couple of cultural lessons with the kids and get them primed and going. Well, I love that. Oh,
that's true.
Japan's an amazing place, isn't it, Adriel?
Oh, I love it. Love it. Can't wait to go back. I love Mount Fuji, as you can see in the middle of our picture here. But doing well, Bill. I think we're sort of getting through the term. I was saying with you off air that we've got a few kids now coming into our classes all sniffly, and lucky we've got a bit of that teacher immunity. I've been copping a little bit of it over the weekend, but I think a good bit of rest and sleep doesn't help to remedy. So looking forward to getting into this. I apologize if my voice does go halfway through the episode, but we'll be good. We'll be good.
Yeah, we'll make it. We'll try our best. We'll all understand you anyway. We're used to you by now. All good. Well, before we get into our artist breakdown that you have so willingly opted to give, we're going to just do a bit of a lit quit for us and our listeners today. So, Adriel, lit or quit? Letting Masuji Ono, who is the protagonist of this novel, for those who might be wondering, ghostwrite your next Band 6 essay. That is so good. I did it all in the best of faith while selectively forgetting the weak bits, still claiming full dignity and agonizing over the artist's role in political change. So what do you reckon? Get him to ghostwrite your next Band 6 essay?
I think that's a quit for me. I don't know if he will know what he's actually talking about, his selective memory. And I can just imagine a Band 6 sort of marker, a marker sitting there thinking, where is this person going with their argument? So ghostwriting that response.
I was just thinking, I don't know as markers if we would understand the true brilliance of his essay in what the few minutes that you have to read it and put a mark down, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right. You know, his selective sort of omissions, you'd be like, well, you know, a bit of textual evidence would have suited you well here, but he's got too much of the maybe, or I don't know if this could have been. And, you know, we always say to our students, we need to be having that high modality language with our persuasive writing. And I know definitely does not demonstrate this, or the way that Ishiguro presents him definitely doesn't allow
definitely
for that.
Likes to sit outside of the lines, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, for a Band 6 response, ghostwriting it, I'd be a bit hesitant with this. How about yourself? What do you think?
How awesome would it be if you could, how awesome would it be if we could, you know, talk to Ishiguro and be like, you know, so what do you think our students should be reflecting on, you know, and what do you think Masuji Ono was really getting at here? So, I mean, I agree with you, total unreliable narrator, so that wouldn't work in any way in terms of a Band 6 essay, but I love the spirit of this lit and quit. Because I think what's really funny is, like, what you probably get out of Masuji Ono's essay is by the end of the essay, he's clear on what he thinks and what he's doing, and he's more reliable now, like he is in the novel. But the first half would just be a total redirection, I think, which would 100%. Be very interesting to read as a marker. I just don't know how it would sit on a criteria, but that's a good one. All right, let's get into the episode for today. So, obviously, Artists of the Floating World, Module B text. It is going to be. Has it moved on to extension now? I think in the new syllabus they might have.
I think so.
Brilliant text. I know. Yeah, teachers who have taught it love this text for a variety of reasons, and I think we're very excited to have you then unpack this. So for anyone who's new teaching this this year, or is, you know, just wanting a bit of a refresher, maybe, you know, I'm sure Adriel will offer some new points and new ways to look at it, because like most of our Module B texts, there's so many different directions that a teacher can go in and directions that a student can take, many approaches. So this is going to be a really good one, I think, for our listeners and any students as well who might be studying artists of the floating world. Yeah, and just want a little bit of extra information, a bit more to deepen kind of their direction and their understanding, this will be really useful too. So thank you so much for offering to present on this, Adriel. No, it's going to be really good. We might get into then our first question for today. So, obviously we're going to break down artists a little bit. The first kind of thing that I want to ask you is about the context of the module. So what is kind of module B, advanced, and then how does artist as a text fit within that module? So what are your thoughts for us out there?
So again, it's just a critical study. So remember, module B demands that sophisticated critical study. So we're looking at how textual form, features, context, shape, meaning, which culminates in that evaluation of textual integrity. That's a key sort of term that we have been really harping on about. My students will definitely know about this idea of textual integrity. And also the extent to which the composer, this is important, the composer represents these complex sort of ideas within the text that resonate with the human experience. I think that's quite important for us. So if we're looking at Artists of the Floating World, the central proposition that we might explore with our students might fall along the lines of, to what extent is Ishiguro's work preoccupied with things like interiors, for example. This is where we're looking at this idea of interiors as a reflective introspection. Oh goodness, told you I'm a bit sick, so I can't get my words out at the moment. But it's understood as that reflective introspection where memories, digressions, and distortions continually haunt the present. And this is that metanarrative that we see, the metanarrative represented through Ono, of self-justification throughout the entirety of the text. So we've sort of been a little bit through that context of module B. Most of our teachers probably already know what the critical study is. And it's that in-depth, we're looking at textual form, features, and context and how they shape meaning.
And we do have some episodes on that too. So if anyone feels like they need refreshers, listen back to our earlier kind of catalogue, and we've done quite a few things there as well. Sorry, please continue.
I know, 100%. So, so some of the textual context, it's a very rich and layered text. So it's composed in 1986 amid Thatcher's Britain. Now, Thatcher is that Iron Lady, or known as the Iron Lady there, or rolling with the iron fist there. As Ishiguro sort of notes himself, during this time, I think those rigid certainties morphed into a self-righteous and sinister aggression of ardent, often youthful sort of factions during this time. So we see that is the author's context, but the novel itself is set between 1948 and 1950. And this is in occupied Japan, where we follow the story of a propaganda artist, or once famous propaganda artist by the name of Masuji Ono, who inhabits a bombed house that is profoundly symbolic of both personal and national ruin. We see, the grieving of his wife, his son, while his daughter, Noriko's miyai, hinges. So miyai meaning the wedding negotiations, which is that big meta-narrative that runs through the entirety of this novel. This miyai, I might be butchering the pronunciation, so I apologize to anyone.
All of us who've taught artists know what you're referring to.
Exactly. But look, it hinges on the scrutiny of his past. We see all of these investigations as to Ono's past dealings. But we also see that Ishiguro, and remember the first thing that I mentioned within this unit, we're looking at, how the composer represents these complex sort of ideas. So we need to understand the didactic intent, the authorial purpose. So Ishiguro's own insights are very invaluable for our students. We can't neglect this when teaching this text to the students. So what we see is the floating world comes to refer to, in a metaphorical sense, the fact that values in a society are always in flux. So I think Ishiguro also adds, I think in one of his interviews, he says, I agonized over the role of the artist in a time of political change. Whilst also there was also a fear that time and history would show that one had backed a wrong, shameful, even evil cause and wasted one of one's best years and talents to it. What a great sort of quote in terms of the didactic intent for, the artist of the floating world. So we follow Ono's artistic trajectory throughout the entirety of this novel. It's a very hard novel to follow. This is where kids will often get confused because they don't know if they're in the present, the past, or the future. Who knows? the unreliable narration, which we'll get into in a bit. But what we see is Ono's artistic trajectory provides a perfect timeline for students as well. So we also see, he goes from adolescence, where his father burns his paintings initially, drives his desire to transcend the family business, which we see a little bit of irony as he becomes a propaganda artist and starts to follow some of these ideals anyway. We see, his time in the Takeda studios producing this mass Japanese art for foreigners. Again, that business-like Japanese culture we start to see. And this is contrasted during this time with Mori-san's aesthetic floating world, where we see the different styles of art within the villa, Mori-san's villa here. And finally, I guess, we see his roles within the Committee of the Arts and the Unpatriotic Committee. So there's a lot here that we can really unpack in terms of context, but I really think that teachers need to understand Ishiguro's context in line with the novel's context. I find that a lot of the times we'll get into Japanese context of World War II, the art and all that, but you really need to link it back to the author's context. Like, why did he write this? What were some of his reasons? I know myself personally, in one of my classes recently, I've put a whole list up of, we did a brainstorming activity on a Google Doc with my class where it's like, okay, look for the didactic purpose. Everything needs to link back to this. Everything that we go through, all the ideas that we go through in the text needs to link back to the authorial intent, the didactic purpose. And I'm going to continue to harp on about that, because without that, you can't have a critical study, because we're not looking at how textual form, features, shape, and context shape the meaning if we don't understand why the author wrote it and for what purposes he wrote the novel in the first place. But yeah, hopefully that gives us a little bit of a breakdown of the context for both the module and novel.
Absolutely. As you said, there's so many layers. I think that's the great word choice for this. There's a lot of layers to the context. And as you said, it's very easy to get bogged down in the contextual setting of the novel and kind of ignore what's influenced Ishiguro here with Thatcher's London or Thatcher's England. But it's so pivotal, isn't it? Because that kind of tension and dogma that is representing within Masuji Ono's story in Artist is actually paralleling to what he's witnessing and experiencing in his own world during Thatcher's regime, the economic and political tension, and he's sort of replicating that in a new landscape, in a sense new that it's his own creation, but also very historical in his approach. So I think you've made some fabulous points there that I know a lot of teachers are going to consider. Absolutely. Well, as we move on to kind of introducing the didactic intent and the context of Artists of the Floating World, how would we then move forward to maybe explore or unpack some of the key ideas or areas of the novel? Because as you said, it's a very dense text. Plot-wise, there's lots of multiple narratives happening across different time frames, and it can get a bit confusing. So which kind of key areas do you like to sort of focus on just to help ground your students and explore and unpack with them?
So I'll go through like 4 key areas that I have looked at this year. And each year it changes depending on the students that I have. So
you can't do everything, especially this novel.
Yeah, that's right. It's quite a dense novel, but look, if we start off with the area where we look at interiors, as we've sort of already alluded to at the beginning of the episode, and this idea of selective unreliability. So we see Ono's singular contradictory voice, which employs abstractions and generalizations to avoid this personal culpability throughout the entirety of the novel. We see that his dignity emerges precisely through admissions, yet the metanarrative of self-justification, as the text sort of notes, Ono has to keep making these admissions, as we see throughout the entirety of the novel. But his dignity arises out of him simply being this idea of human, because like at the end of the day, when we're looking at the Japanese culture, this idea of status, dignity, respect, we're seeing that these are massive parts of that culture, and we see Ono himself struggle with this tension, between the interiors and the selective unreliability. So you can really move into that. And we'll go through a few techniques in a little bit with that area, but that would be the first area that I would focus in on. So interiors and selective unreliability. My second area would be the values in flux and the distinctive textual qualities that we might really need to look at. Now, we have to look at distinctive qualities. This is probably one of the ones that you would have to do because it's a critical study. So we might look at the stilted ideas within the text, the unemotive prose that mimics a Japanese to English translation. I know a few of my students this year have actually picked up on this. It feels like the novel is trying to reflect this Japanese type of literature, yet it's written in English, and we can see that unemotive sort of prose then develop out of that. The fragmentation and non-linear analepsis with both internal and external flashbacks. We see the big reveal device, so images of decay and construction as well. We see American cultural illusions, character foils and mirrors. So some of the key motifs that you might want to include or highlight when you're exploring the values in flux and distinctive textual qualities might include things like the weather and the seasons, little objects like the lanterns, this idea of burning. I love that idea of burning and the fire. And
and the kindling everything.
Yeah, exactly right. Renewal, refreshment, there's so many great ideas that you could speak about. You've got the idea of bulldozers, the removing of one culture and moving into the other, paintings, and then obviously the Arakama train ride as well, and how that functions throughout the entirety of the novel itself. So there's a few sort of motifs there that I'm sure there's much available on the internet for teachers and students alike to definitely go and explore. I always encourage my students jump onto Google Scholar or JSTOR if you've got access to it, and have a read of some of the critical documents, because the academic readings will definitely help you there. Then the third area you might be looking at is the function of the artist. So we see Ono's timeline illuminating Ishiguro's agonizing interrogation of art's political utility. That's probably a nice way of looking at the text. Rather than just looking at Ono's role as a propaganda artist, we're looking at how Ono's timeline represents Ishiguro's agonizing interrogation of art's political utility. We can look at the idea of moving from the aesthetic refuge in Mori-san's world to the propaganda instrument of eyes to the horizon, as we sort of see as Ono moves throughout his journey as an artist as well. So there's a few areas in terms of the function of the artist that teachers and students alike can unpack. And then my last sort of area, and this is where we start to look at ideas like the fallibility of memory, which I'm going to explore, but it's the intersecting narrative tracks and themes. So we see the Miyagi tensions. We see the anxieties to do with suicide, because of a lot of Ono's contemporaries during that time, and his family's worry for him, maybe going down that track as well. The idea of Kuroda's betrayal, maybe the family's discord, and intersect with core themes of tensions between progress and tradition as well. We see this in some of the digressions and conversations that he has with Setsuko, and then even Noriko, as they continue to the Miyagi sort of negotiations there. Ideas of collective guilt and responsibility. We have identity, so both national identity and personal identity being in flux at all times. This is probably the most common one, fallibility of memory. Lots of my students seem to just fall into this idea of failure, but there's so much, as you can already see.
So much.
Yeah, right. You've got art and aesthetics and their political use, as we sort of referenced before. And then you've got existential questions of purpose, morality, and what it truly means to be good as well throughout the entirety of this study. So, there's some great things. Keep an eye out. We've got some resources coming out as well for this as well. So maybe we'll put this in a list for us for our listeners as well, Belle, later on down the track for them to have a listen to as well. So, or have something to sort of guide them. I know we're speaking out loud, but there's so much. There is so much in this novel to unpack, and as you mentioned, alluded to at the beginning of this episode, I think it is now an extension text, so I can see why it is, and we might do an episode later, how this might be related to extension. But for the purposes of our B study, I think those are some of those key areas that teachers and
Yeah.
students alike should.
No, that's fabulous, because you've offered quite a lot of concepts here that gives a lot of room to move across various issues in the text, move across various characters as well. And I really like the fact that the concepts work well with those didactic intent statements that you talked about a little bit earlier when we started this episode. So, Ishiguro did give quite a lot of interviews about artists, and you can find them on YouTube. I mean, I've certainly shown them to students in the past. You can create a bit of a list of didactic statements that he has made. And, if you have students that are feeling a little lost or a little stuck, get them to pick one of interest and then get them to consider which kind of ideas or issues might fit within that. And I find personally the students do better when they're picking the approach and the analysis that suits what really stood out to them and interested them. So if they're interested by this idea of truth and unreliability, like you said, a lot of yours this year tend to be, I know that's been a favorite in the past, they might go with that. If they're really interested in this idea of culpability or reconciliation, they might go with that. I know I've had students that are real history buffs that like to lean into the role and power of dogma and how art and other kind of creative modes can become a vehicle for that, spread of information. So I think you've offered a lot of different ideas here, and all kind of takes are fabulous. So that's awesome. Thank you. Well, I might ask you then, leading on from that, so what skills then do you think students need to really address to be making sure that they're properly, exploring these key ideas and issues and actually engaging with their approach? What are some of the skills probably necessary for that?
Yeah. Okay. So you really have to encourage, this idea of independent research. I would say a minimum of maybe 2 hours. Looking at, how Ishiguro's, as you've just mentioned, his interviews. We're looking at secondary criticisms through some of those academic readings and journals, which there are an abundance of them available online. Remember, students need to construct complex arguments with an authentic personal voice for this unit. So we've also done a few episodes on this as well, for how to write these essays. So feel free to go back and have a listen to those. But these ideas of sustaining and nuanced. So, for example, to what extent position with evaluative language, because the key verb's always going to be evaluation in the "you will be assessed on" section in the HSC. You haven't noted this before. Making sure you're sustaining that position with evaluative language and flexibility by regularly practicing maybe opposing viewpoints, also to test reasoning. So just having a holistic look, because you just don't know what the question's going to be on the day, And it's just good to get a very good idea of different perspectives as well. And I think one of the key things is you want to, have a mastery of form over content. This is non-negotiable. So analyze how and why techniques operate. For example, we might say like how the stilted prose creates ambiguity, and how maybe the analepsis mirrors memory's fallibility in relation to the purpose and context. And this is probably like that big differentiator between that band 5 and 6 response in particular. It'll make your response stand out. And I think lastly, you want to cultivate, I guess this is more for teachers and even students actually, you have to cultivate a band 6 mindset of intrinsic curiosity, and what that basically means is, you're going to be taking that intellectual risk taking. I find a lot of students will often wait till the teacher gives them an affirmative, hey, this is good, before they continue moving on. They want us to hold their hand throughout the whole process. But I feel like the students that often go on to get those band 6s are intellectual risk takers, they're going through an active feedback cycle of write, receive, rewrite, they're moving through these consistent processes. I think it's important. And those are some of those key skills in particular for the band 6 response. Now for the critical study module, it's going to be an essay. And this is why we're talking about this whole idea of write, receive, rewrite, practice, all of these sorts of ideas. You've probably heard it. We sound like a broken record, but there's some key ideas and skills that need to be addressed.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you said, that idea of the personal voice is so powerful, and it comes out more strongly when a student is really just trying to get their thoughts down on paper first, because often that becomes a lot more nuanced, right? Rather than them just tapping into something that was discussed in class or highlighted in class. If they're actually sitting down and thinking, well, what do I think this is about? What is my point on this and my perspective? Often the response is so much more nuanced, and obviously we know that that's a big feature of module B. You have to have that personal voice with that complex argument. So then you also talked a lot about here the how and the why, and the form, talking about the form, because I think sometimes students sort of go to talk a lot about the context and then miss out how that's actually being conveyed in the language. So that then leads us nicely into question 4 then, Adriel. So what are some of those literary and stylistic techniques that you think students should really master in their understanding to be able to then apply them within whatever their argument is in their future essays and approaches?
Yeah, I think as you sort of said, you want to be linking these techniques or these stylistic elements to form, purpose, context, a big thing. So the first one for the artist of the floating world might be the singular, unreliable narrative voice that we see is often quite contradictory throughout the entirety of this novel. So Ono speaks in abstractions and generalizations precisely to avoid this idea of personal culpability. So I would say, you want to teach your students, and if you are a student as well, you need to be able to identify how, the how, it's not just identify it, but identify how this singular unreliable narrative voice creates ambiguity and forces the reader into this role of the detective, and this will link directly to that textual integrity that we keep speaking of. The second sort of stylistic technique that I might throw out, then I don't have many, like there's quite a few, but these are just some simple ones to get you started off with. Might be the fragmentation and the non-linear structure of the novel. So we see that the novel uses analepsis, so these internal flashbacks triggered by present moments, and external analepsis that jumps across 4 dated sections, which we see that the novel is split into those 4 different moments there. And what this does, it demonstrates for example, with the pleasure district scene or the bridge of hesitation, they show how these shifts mirror the fallibility of memory and the floating, if we put the floating in quotation marks here, nature of values that are present within these societies. So that's what the fragmentation and non-linear structure sort of acts as, or its purpose throughout this novel. We see big reveal devices as well, and conflicting narratives. So, for example, you've got the Miyai confession and the final self-vindication stand-in tension. So students have to practice evaluating how Ishiguro withholds and then releases information to interrogate things like human dignity. It's something that you might move into. So this is this idea of the big reveal device through those conflicting narratives. And then the last one, this is probably the easiest one. Oh, sorry, not last, second or third last one. Well, I'm halfway through now. Goodness me. You've got you've got the extended metaphor and imagery. These are simple ones, and there's plenty throughout this entirety of this novel. So I love to look at the ideas or the metaphors to do with destruction and construction. Here we can see the bombed house, the bulldozers clearing, the pleasure district, for example, and the aggregation of decay images through these. So again, if you're a student or you're a teacher, you want to be linking these explicitly to Ishiguro's quote on the fear of wasted talent. Again, do you see it's not Ono's quote, it's Ishiguro's quote. We're linking it back to didactic purpose. Very, very important. We've already mentioned motifs and symbols. So we looked at weather and seasons, lanterns, and so on and so forth. But then you've also got the symbolism of setting. So, for example, the bridge of hesitation functions as this. You've got the former pleasure district. And then you've got the floating world itself. I think that's very, very important for our students to comprehend and grapple with. Because, I mean, look at the title of the novel. It's an artist of the floating world. So it's going to have some sort of significance. So I would really encourage teachers here to ask those questions to do with the floating world. What is it? Getting to understand how it functions, and looking at its significance. So, yeah, very important there. And then
Yeah.
finally, the last one here, you've got allusions to American culture throughout the entirety of this novel. So, I mean, one of the first cutest ones is the little sort of interactions between Ono and his grandson Ichiro. And Ichiro's got this idea of the Lone Ranger, and it goes completely against what Ono thought a youngster of his age should be, looking up to. So you've got the G.I. Joes coming in later on, and Lone Rangers,
Yeah.
cowboys, and, all of these sorts
Yeah.
of ideas. So
Popeye.
these are, yeah, that's right. So you've got these allusions to American culture. And then you've got character foils and mirrors. So you've got Ono versus Kuroda, for example, Ono versus
Yeah.
Matsuda, and then Ono against
Yeah.
his two daughters. What are those
Yeah.
sorts of foils and mirrors that we see? So, yeah, there's a few ideas there for our teachers to have a look at in regards to
Fabulous.
literary and stylistic techniques to get you started.
Okay. You've definitely given us quite a good list then. As you said, what you choose to focus on stylistic and technique-wise is really going to depend on the purpose and, the concepts that you're focusing on. So
Yeah.
to kind of wrap up then for our final question, Adriel, you started with the context, you've got into some key areas we can explore, the skills that students would need in exploring those, and the form and features. So lastly then, how do we translate all of that kind of stuff into ideas that would work within a persuasive essay? Like, what are your recommendations for that?
Yeah. I think the big things are, you want high modality language plus that evaluative voice, especially for a creative, sorry, not a creative, a critical study. So this is where you might look at, for example, Ishiguro's profound preoccupation with interiors and the metaphorical floating world, which masterfully reveals the memories through deliberate digressions, abstractions, and distortions, but ultimately enable flawed individuals like Ono to salvage a measure of human dignity amidst societal values in perpetual flux. So really looking at like evaluative language, that high modality language as well. We generally look at our essays as well. So remember, in each of your essays, we've had a few episodes on how to actually develop this, and it's important for teachers to really scaffold this. I think for our students in this day and age, teachers do need to scaffold this. And now, if you're a student listening to this, you need to practice. Don't just look at the scaffold and say, "Cool, I can just plug and play this last minute." No, you have to practice. You have to adapt it. You need to, manipulate it. You need to make it work for you, because it's not a one shoe fits all sort of idea here. We're looking at what works for you. So very, very important for us to look at, a thesis, for example, in our introduction. Your body paragraphs have those topic sentences which link back to your thesis, your argument. And remember, through the body, you're looking at ideas. You're not looking at just a retelling or summary of the text. A conceptual-based response is very, very important. And again, I'm going to say, go back and listen to our Band 6 episodes for writing an essay, and you'll get a bit more here in terms of the in-depth ideas as to how to write an essay. But yeah, look, I think one of the other cool things that I keep forgetting to mention is, evidence integration. I always shake my head when students will write, like, and this is a metaphor, and this is a simile, or like they don't know how to actually interrogate evidence properly. And this is why we say practice. So you've got your technique, then you've got your precise quote, then you've got the effect on the responder. Then you might have that evaluative link to the module and your personal voice there. So yeah, it's very important. And then lastly, I'll just give you a few sort of tips if you're a student listening to this. Practice weekly timed essays under unseen conditions. Then you hand those essays back to your teachers. It goes back to what I mentioned earlier on. Write, feedback, rewrite, So you get the feedback afterwards, edit it with a checklist, and then make sure you don't just leave it, you rewrite it as well, incorporating the feedback. This includes, making sure that you research, you have your independent research. You can read a sustained form of analysis as well, and that's often I would say identified through reading your work out aloud. I often get my students to read their work out aloud. So all these little tips and tricks will definitely help you move towards that high band 5, band 6 sort of response but it needs to be done consistently. Like, this process needs to be adopted consistently rather than something that's just done intermittently, because then you're probably, I mean, you might be lucky to get into the band 5, but you're probably high band 4 sort of range if you're not working consistently. But those are a few sort of, there's ideas, that I would say that would look at for our persuasive essay. But yeah, hopefully I've unpacked a little bit of the artist of the floating world for our listeners today, and just some ways into the text. I think that's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, no, you've absolutely done a fantastic job, Adriel. And I like that you're, emphasizing as well to students that are listening, you've got to put the work in here, because not only is, module B advanced a difficult module, but you've also got artists that's quite a difficult text. And so if you're leaving it to the last minute, you're more likely to, end up not performing as well. So definitely that, continue working with, continue trying your best. You have offered some fantastic ways in on all kind of aspects of the text, which I know is going to be really, really valuable to our listeners. So thank you so much, Adriel, for covering artists. As Adriel said, listeners, we do have other episodes that might support some of the things we talked about in artist, like your analytical writing episodes, our band 6 episodes. So please do check out our back catalogue. We've got quite a lot of episodes in there with lots of practical tips and strategies as well for teachers and students alike. So thank you so much again, Adriel. Thank you to all our listeners. We've got all our socials accounts. We've got our Teachers Pay Teachers account with resources. We will be popping up some artist resources really soon as well. So check in on that within the next day or two. And as always, thank you for listening. Please get in touch, like, share, subscribe. Definitely share us around. We'd love to hear from more teachers who are engaging with our content, just, helping build that community, right, Adriel?
Yeah, that's correct. We love your feedback, and we love your contributions as well. So looking forward to hearing from all of our listeners and teachers alike. So thank you guys.